There are souls who move through the world differently. Their presence is quiet, yet undeniable, like the stillness of a deep lake reflecting the heavens above. They do not conquer tension with noise, nor demand respect with force. Instead, they embody a subtle mastery, the mastery of the self. This mastery is not perfection. It is not a mask, nor the polished image of someone who has silenced all flaws. It is a deeper knowing, a wisdom carved by shadow and light, by suffering and the courage to face it. Carl Jung once spoke of individuation, the journey of becoming whole by integrating what was once hidden in the unconscious. Those with high emotional intelligence are not those who have avoided pain, but those who have walked through it without turning away. They have entered the labyrinth of the psyche and returned with treasures. You notice them in the smallest of gestures. They do not speak to fill silence, for they know silence has its own language. They do not wound to protect themselves, for they have faced the sharp edge of their own defenses and softened them into awareness. And perhaps you have felt it. When such a person looks at you, it is as though they see beneath the surface, past the words, into the quiet truth of your being. They are not distracted by appearances, not easily swayed by masks. They sense what is unspoken because they have listened for years to what was unspoken within themselves. But what is it that sets them apart? Not what they do, but rather what they refuse to do. Their strength lies not in constant action, but in restraint. Their clarity is not found in control of others, but in the refusal to betray themselves. In love, in conflict, in desire, in grief, they move with an awareness that feels almost otherworldly. And yet, it is not mystical. It is born of something deeply human. The willingness to meet their own shadow, to understand their own projections, and to face the archetypes that dwell within the collective unconscious. They never walk blindly, though they are not afraid of the dark. They never lash out without reflection, though they are not strangers to anger. They never abandon their inner compass, though the world may tempt them toward chaos. And you, yes, you might wonder if you could embody such power. Not the loud power of domination, but the quiet sovereignty of one who cannot be shaken. This script is a mirror held up to you. It is not here to flatter, nor to accuse, but to awaken. For within you, too, lives the potential for this depth of being. The question is not whether you can possess it. The question is whether you are willing to face what it requires. The shedding of illusions, the courage to hold tension without escape, the patience to listen to the truths that whisper only in stillness. Those with high emotional intelligence are not extraordinary by nature. They are ordinary souls who have chosen not to run. There is one pattern that high emotional intelligence dissolves before it can poison the soul. They do not run from themselves. Most people, when faced with discomfort, seek escape. They drown it in noise, in endless scrolling, in fleeting pleasures, in the company of those who demand nothing real of them. They avoid their own silence because in silence, the truth speaks, and the truth can be unbearable. But the one who has walked the path of emotional intelligence knows that avoidance is a prison. Jung taught that whatever is not brought to consciousness returns as fate. The unclaimed shadow, ignored and denied, emerges again in the outer world as suffering. Broken relationships, unexplainable anger, endless cycles of the same mistakes. The emotionally intelligent soul does not allow this repetition to rule them. When pain rises, they do not numb it. When jealousy burns, they do not bury it. When fear whispers, they do not pretend it isn't there. Instead, they hold it. They sit in the fire. They let the shadow reveal itself, knowing that in its terrifying form lies the key to freedom. Think of the lovers who run from intimacy, blaming the other for every crack in the bond. Think of the leaders who mask their insecurities with arrogance. Think of the endless dance of projection, where what is fear within is cast outward upon another. These are the patterns of those who flee themselves. The emotionally intelligent refuse this path. They do not project their wounds onto the nearest victim. They do not demand that another carry the weight of their unhealed pain. They know that when a storm rises inside, the first task is not to strike outward but to descend inward. This descent is not weakness. It is power. For the one who dares to face their own darkness cannot be manipulated by it. They are no longer driven by unseen forces, no longer enslaved by unconscious wounds. Instead, they meet others with clarity, not distortion, with presence, not pretense. And you, yes, you, might ask yourself, how often do you run? How often do you silence the voice inside because it unsettles you? How often do you grasp at distractions rather than listen to the tremble of your own soul? The truth is stark. Until you stop fleeing, you will keep chasing what cannot fulfill you. The emotionally intelligent know this. That is why they choose stillness when others run. They choose awareness when others hide. They choose to sit with what most spend a lifetime escaping. For they know the ancient paradox. The more you resist a shadow, the more it rules you. The more you face it, the more it becomes your ally. This is why their presence feels different. They are not scattered by inner wars, nor fractured by denial. They have made peace with themselves. And from that peace, they carry a power that no one can take away. There is another quiet power in those who wield emotional intelligence. They do not allow the past to govern their present. Many wander through life carrying the echoes of old betrayals, the shadows of childhood wounds, the ghostly voices of those who once said they were not enough. Most project these echoes onto the world, interpreting neutral moments as judgment, gentle gestures as threats, silence as rejection. They replay old dramas, unconsciously scripting new pain from ancient fear. But the emotionally intelligent do not live as prisoners of their history. Jung described projection as the unconscious casting of internal shadows onto external reality. Those unaware cannot see it. They suffer as if the past is a living predator stalking their steps. The emotionally intelligent, however, see the projection. They recognize the source. They name it, and then, with deliberate courage, they release it. They do not drag resentment into the present. They do not allow anger at yesterday to poison today. They do not punish the living for the mistakes of the departed. In relationships, this creates a magnetism that is nearly unshakable, because they meet others as they are, not as the echoes of their shadows would dictate. You might feel a flicker of unease reading this, for it asks you to examine yourself. How often have you judged someone not by who they are, but by what you have endured? How often has anger whispered, "This is happening again," when the pattern belongs only to memory? How often have you carried yesterday's pain into moments that should have been free? Those with high emotional intelligence do not. They step lightly into each encounter. They allow the present to breathe. They meet the other not as a vessel for blame, but as a being in their own right. Attachment patterns, when unhealed, can bind people to cycles of repetition. The emotionally intelligent see these patterns in themselves and refuse to be enslaved by them. They recognize when their fear is triggered, when their ego cries for dominance, when their shadows insist upon retribution. And then they pause. They choose differently. This is not easy. It is not instantaneous. It is a lifetime of noticing, of questioning, of holding one's own storms without dumping them upon another. Yet this is a distinction between those who live in unconscious turmoil and those who walk with the quiet authority of understanding. And so, they carry a freedom that others cannot mimic. The freedom to love without fear, to speak without manipulation, to engage without compulsion. They are the ones who do not replay the past, who do not drag old shadows into the present, and who understand that peace is not found in controlling others, but in mastering oneself. Another subtle, almost imperceptible truth emerges in those with high emotional intelligence. They do not react impulsively to provocation. Most people, when confronted with criticism, disappointment, or betrayal, respond immediately. The ego flares. Words are hurled. Defenses rise like walls. The emotional storms of the moment dictate action, leaving only regret in their wake. But the emotionally intelligent pause. They feel the tremor of irritation, the pull of resentment, the spike of fear, and they do not allow it to dictate their response. Jung would call this recognition the shadow, the awareness of the anger or impatience within as a reflection, not necessarily a reality, but the unclaimed, unintegrated part of themselves. They understand projection not as a theory, but as lived experience. When someone lashes out, it is rarely just about them. It is a projection of their own shadow. And rather than absorbing it, responding in kind, or trying to correct it, the emotionally intelligent observe it. They witness the reaction without merging with it. You may recognize this in yourself. The quick flare of judgment in another's perceived slight, the reflex to escalate when feeling vulnerable, the compulsion to defend, explain, or retaliate. These are the habits that fracture connection, that twist desire, that erode intimacy. But the emotionally intelligent choose otherwise. They meet conflict with discernment, not reaction. They hold their boundaries with firmness and grace, allowing space for both themselves and the other to breathe. They understand that true strength is not in dominating, correcting, or controlling, but in sustaining composure in the face of chaos. This mastery does not make them cold. It makes them magnetic. For nothing is more compelling than a soul that does not collapse under the weight of emotion, that is not enslaved by impulse, and that meets tension with awareness. They do not chase validation through argument, nor demand recognition through drama. They do not carry grudges, for grudges are the chains of the ego. And because of this, others are drawn to them, not by force, but by the quiet certainty that presence alone communicates power, understanding, and safety. The emotionally intelligent do not allow the chaos of the world, nor the projections of others, to govern their inner state. They maintain sovereignty of mind and heart, and in that sovereignty lies a subtle, irresistible authority. A further layer of their quiet mastery reveals itself in relationships. They do not surrender themselves to attachment out of fear. Many are swept away by the currents of desire and longing, clinging to another as if their own existence depends on it. They sacrifice their values, mute their intuition, and abandon their inner compass to preserve connection. The result is a shadow bond, a tension that stifles both souls. But the emotionally intelligent do not allow attachment to dictate their essence. They feel desire, they honor longing, yet they remain anchored in themselves. They understand that true intimacy is not possession, but alignment, It cannot be coerced, nor maintained through desperation. It is born when two sovereign beings choose to merge while maintaining their wholeness. Carl Jung's wisdom teaches that projection in love distorts reality. Those unaware project their unmet needs onto the other, seeking fulfillment where it cannot truly exist. The emotionally intelligent refuse this trap. They recognize when traction is clouded by unresolved desire, when fear masquerades as passion, and when the longing for approval threatens their integrity. And they step back, not with judgment, but with clarity. This refusal is not coldness, it is discernment. They do not chase approval. They do not beg for affection. They do not bargain for love by sacrificing their sense of self. Instead, they radiate a confidence that is magnetic precisely because it is untainted by fear. Consider the silent power of someone who can say no without trembling, who can withhold reaction without resentment, who can remain present without surrendering their own center. These are the qualities that draw others, not through compulsion, but through resonance. You, too, may have noticed how often relationships falter under the weight of unconscious attachment, how often desire becomes entanglement, how often love is mistaken for ownership. The emotionally intelligent navigate these waters differently. They honor connection, yet refuse entrapment. They cultivate closeness, yet safeguard freedom. In every encounter, they hold space for themselves and the other. In every union, they insist on authenticity over appeasement. They understand that love does not demand annihilation of the self. It thrives in the dance of wholeness meeting wholeness. And you, when was the last time you held your presence steady in the face of longing? When did you refuse to barter your integrity for the illusion of closeness? The emotionally intelligent do not merely survive desire. They embody it consciously, shaping it rather than being shaped by it. Another subtle yet profound truth of the emotionally intelligent is this: they do not let the ego govern their interactions. Most people navigate life through the lens of self-importance, defending status, proving worth, and protecting fragile identities. Every slight feels monumental. Every disagreement feels like a threat to existence. The ego, unchecked, becomes a tyrant, dictating words, actions, and even affections. But the emotionally intelligent recognize the tyranny of the ego. They observe its whispers, its urgencies, its hunger for validation, and they do not yield. Jung described the ego as a necessary but limited construct, a persona that can either imprison or serve. Those with high emotional intelligence have chosen the latter. The ego exists to guide, not to rule. In practice, this means they do not argue to dominate. They do not compete for attention. They do not manipulate to control. They do not measure relationships as tests of superiority. Instead, they act from a place of awareness, understanding that connection is not a battlefield, but a mirror in which both selves can reflect and grow. They see when projection arises, not only in themselves but in others. When anger or criticism is flung their way, they do not retaliate impulsively. They do not absorb it as a personal failure. They witness it, decode it, and respond with measured clarity. You may recognize how rare this is, how often others react without seeing, judge without understanding, or act from unresolved pride. The emotionally intelligent are different because they have learned that power lies not in ego assertion, but in the calm sovereignty of self-awareness. In love, this distinction is magnetic. They do not demand admiration or compliance. They do not twist words or intentions to reinforce their identity. Instead, they engage from authenticity. They understand that intimacy flourishes when both parties feel safe from manipulation, free from performance, and liberated from judgment. Their freedom is contagious. It invites others to drop their own masks, to speak truth, to embrace vulnerability without fear of reprisal. And it is precisely this refusal to let ego dominate that distinguishes them from the majority, whose hearts are enslaved by pride, insecurity, or fear. They do not need to prove themselves. They do not need to assert control. They do not need to manufacture influence. Instead, they emanate authority through presence, clarity, and unshakable awareness. There's a profound distinction in those with high emotional intelligence. They do not allow unresolved trauma to dictate their choices. Most wander through life carrying the silent weight of past wounds. Childhood neglect, heartbreak, betrayal. These shadows often shape decisions, coloring perception, and bending behavior in ways unseen. The unhealed become reactive, compulsive, defensive, and unconsciously destructive, but the emotionally intelligent confront these shadows. Jung called the unacknowledged trauma the shadow self, a repository of pain, fear, and unclaimed energy. Those who master emotional awareness do not bury it. They face it, sit with it, and learn its language. They allow the past to inform wisdom, not to control destiny. They do not project old pain onto new relationships. They do not blame another for echoes of previous suffering. They do not act out unresolved fear, attempting to rewrite history through dominance, control, or retreat. You might feel the tension of recognition here. How often has the past seeped silently into the present, causing fear, distrust, or repeated cycles of hurt? How often have you acted as though someone were guilty for what another did long ago? The emotionally intelligent recognize these patterns immediately. They refuse the chains of history. They integrate trauma through awareness and self-compassion. They speak to their own wounds, not through denial, not through distraction, but through reflection and healing. They allow themselves to feel, to mourn, to release. And in this process, they do not let the past poison connection or twist desire. In love, in friendship, in every human encounter, this refusal manifests as steadiness. They are not brittle under pressure. They are not reactive when triggered. They remain anchored, not by suppression, but by understanding. And the magnetic truth is this: freedom from unconscious trauma is not just liberation for themselves. It radiates outward. Others feel it. They are drawn to the calm, the depth, the authentic presence that trauma left unclaimed cannot achieve. Thus, they navigate the world not as victims of their history, but as sovereign beings, capable of intimacy, choice, and engagement without the burden of unconscious pain. Another truth quietly distinguishes those with high emotional intelligence. They do not indulge in envy or comparison. Most measure their worth against others, tallying successes, possessions, appearances, or influence. They look at the brilliance of another and feel diminishment. The green fire of envy gnaws silently, distorting perception, creating resentment and poisoning desire. It is a shadow that masks itself as ambition or judgment, yet it erodes the soul. The emotionally intelligent do not fall into this trap. They recognize the futility of comparison. Jungian psychology teaches that the path to individuation requires seeing oneself as a unique expression of the collective psyche. To compare is to diminish the sacred singularity of self. They understand that every individual carries a distinct purpose, a distinct journey. Their attention is on their own growth, their own integration, their own shadow. They do not measure success through others' approval. They do not compete for validation, nor clutch at fleeting recognition. Instead, they honor their own rhythm, celebrate their own progress, and allow others to shine without bitterness. In this space, envy loses its grip. Desire for approval fades. Confidence arises naturally from self-awareness and self-respect. You may recognize the subtle tension in the ordinary, the way envy curls in silence, how comparison drives anxiety, how admiration is tainted with judgment. The emotionally intelligent do not deny feeling. It is not suppression, but they refuse to let it control them. They transform potential dissonance into curiosity, learning, and self-reflection rather than resentment. In relationships, this refusal manifests as generosity. They celebrate another's success, uplift rather than compete, and offer presence rather than judgment. This magnetism is irresistible because it comes from a deep internal freedom, a soul unshackled from petty rivalry. Theirs is a power without assertion. Their satisfaction is not external but intrinsic. And the world feels lighter, more expansive, more authentic in their presence because they have learned the subtle alchemy. To never compare is to always remain whole. A further revelation of those who embody high emotional intelligence is their refusal to manipulate, deceive, or coerce others to meet their own needs. Most humans, when desires feel urgent or validation feels scarce, resort to subtle forms of control. Words are twisted, truths bent, actions calculated to elicit response, to secure approval, or to bend another's will. This is a shadow of the ego's hunger, a reflection of unclaimed fear, and a denial of authentic connection. The emotionally intelligent do not follow this path. They recognize that any bond forged through manipulation is brittle, destined to fracture under the weight of truth. They engage with honesty, clarity, and deliberate integrity. Jungian insight teaches that projecting one's own unmet needs onto others creates suffering, both the projector and the projected. They refuse to perpetuate this cycle. You might sense the tension this evokes. How often does subtle coercion slip unnoticed into ordinary interaction? How many times has influence masqueraded as persuasion, or silence served as control? The emotionally intelligent navigate a different terrain. Their words are aligned with their intent. Their actions mirror their values, and their relationships are contract of authenticity rather than games of power. In love, this refusal manifests as respect for boundaries, for autonomy, and for truth. They do not withhold affection to manipulate, nor feign vulnerability to extract reassurance. They do not play roles or perform, but show themselves fully, expecting the same from others. Their presence evokes trust, not suspicion, attraction, not obligation. This mastery creates an invisible magnetism. Others feel intuitively. There is a rare elegance in a person who asks nothing beyond authenticity, who offers clarity instead of deception, who holds the sovereignty of self while honoring the freedom of another. They do not need to bend reality or the will of others. They do not coerce or calculate. They do not mask their needs in secrecy. And it is precisely in this refusal that they command the deepest connection. Because connection built on manipulation is fleeting, but connection built on truth is eternal. And finally, the last thread that binds their quiet mastery. They do not betray their own value for fleeting comfort or social approval. Most drift through life seeking acceptance, performing in the theater of others' expectations, bending like reeds in the wind of judgment. Integrity becomes negotiable, conviction diluted, and the self loses form beneath the pressure of conformity. They compromise for praise, for love, for temporary relief, and in doing so, they fracture the subtle architecture of their soul. The emotionally intelligent refuse this. They understand that external approval is transient, yet inner alignment is eternal. Jungian psychology teaches that individuation, the integration of self, is not achieved through imitation, but through facing the self wholly, embracing shadow, and cultivating authenticity. To betray oneself is to feed the unconscious chaos, to allow projection and ego to reign. They do not speak or act contrary to what they know is right. They do not indulge in hypocrisy, nor warp truth for comfort. They hold their moral and emotional compass steady, even when the world tempts them to bend. They know that authenticity may provoke discomfort, even rejection, but that such discomfort is a currency for lasting integrity. You may feel the gravity of this challenge. How often have you silenced your truth for acceptance? How often have you pretended to agree, to fit, to appease, to avoid friction? The emotionally intelligent confront this impulse, pause in attention, and act from a place of alignment. In relationships, in work, in love, in daily interaction, this refusal is revolutionary. It invites respect rather than submission, trust rather than doubt, depth rather than pretense. They inspire others not through coercion or charm, but by demonstrating the possibility of living entirely in accord with one's own essence. They have walked a labyrinth of shadow, fear, desire, and ego. They have faced trauma, confronted envy, and dissolved projection. They have learned to pause before reaction, to hold boundaries without rigidity, to embrace desire without entanglement, to meet others with honesty and sovereignty. And in this, their presence becomes a force beyond words. They do not chase, manipulate, compare, or betray. They do not let the past dominate, the ego rule, the shadow fester, or fear dictate choice. They move as rivers move, deep, silent, unstoppable. And in their flow, they awaken something in others, the recognition that emotional mastery is not a gift granted, but a courage claimed, a journey undertaken, a life lived fully, consciously, and powerfully.